The global cinematic landscape has experienced an extraordinary and deeply fascinating transformation, a narrative driven not merely by staggering financial metrics but by a profound cultural resonance that spans generations and continents. The theatrical marketplace has found itself anchored by two seemingly disparate box office titans that have captured the imagination of the viewing public, redefining what constitutes a modern blockbuster in an era often dominated exclusively by caped crusaders and digital spectacles. On one side of this glittering coin stands a monumental musical biopic that chronicles the unparalleled artistry and tempestuous life of the single most influential pop icon in human history, an expansive production that has effectively defied critical skepticism to march triumphantly toward the ultra-rare milestone of $800 million worldwide. On the other side, a chic and deceptively sharp satirical sequel has sliced through the summer competition, leaning into a wave of sharp-witted nostalgia, impeccable high-fashion styling, and the irresistible magnetism of its reunited legendary cast to comfortably cross the $600 million mark on the global stage. Together, these two cinematic forces represent a massive triumph for mid- to high-budget filmmaking that relies heavily on human performance, cultural iconography, and the unmatched power of pure star wattage, demonstrating that audiences are deeply hungry for stories rooted in recognizable real-world glamour, musical legacy, and complex character dynamics. The story of the first of these behemoths begins in the late spring, a period traditionally reserved for explosive science fiction epics and comic book adaptations, when a highly authorized and deeply ambitious biographical feature entered the theatrical arena with a mountain of public anticipation and an equally formidable baggage of historical controversy. Directed with a sweeping, visually opulent eye by a filmmaker known for balancing raw stylistic energy with intense character drama, and starring a young performer who bears not just the physical resemblance but the actual genetic lineage of the subject he portrays, the musical epic shattered every preconceived notion of how a biographical film could perform commercially. The initial financial forecasts for the film were admittedly cautious, with industry insiders and data analysts predicting a highly respectable but ultimately modest domestic debut that hovered somewhere between $50 and $70 million, a number that reflected a lingering uncertainty about whether modern moviegoers would turn out in droves for a story that had been subjected to decades of intense media scrutiny and deeply polarizing public debate. When the doors to the multiplexes finally swung open, however, the response was nothing short of an earth-shattering cultural phenomenon, as an overwhelming deluge of fans, music enthusiasts, and curious onlookers flooded theaters to witness a definitive cinematic treatment of the king of pop. The film did not merely outperform its tracking metrics, it completely obliterated them, moonwalking its way to a stunning $97 million domestic opening weekend that sent shockwaves through the executive suites of Hollywood and immediately established the production as an all-time box office heavyweight. This initial domestic triumph was only a single piece of a far larger, deeply intricate global puzzle, as the international marketplace responded to the film with an enthusiasm that can only be described as a reflection of the subject's own historic global dominance. Across Europe, Latin America, and Asia, the musical biopic struck a deeply resonant chord, pulling in an astonishing $120 million from overseas territories in its very first weekend to bring its initial global haul to a staggering $217 million. This opening weekend performance instantly etched itself into the history books, comfortably surpassing the monumental worldwide debuts of previous biographical milestones like Christopher Nolan's historical masterpiece about the atomic bomb and the wildly successful celebration of Queen's musical legacy. What made this achievement particularly remarkable was the fact that the film managed to shrug off a collective wave of critical indifference and outright hostility from prominent media reviewers, who frequently criticized the production for adopting a somewhat sanitized and heavily authorized approach to the more controversial, deeply troubled aspects of the protagonist's personal life. The divergence between professional critical opinion and grassroots audience reception was stark, vivid, and historically profound, represented by a massive gulf in aggregate ratings where a dismal critical approval rating was met with an almost perfect, near-unanimous audience satisfaction score. Moviegoers were clearly not looking for a clinical, investigative documentary, they were seeking an immersive, emotionally charged, and visually spectacular celebration of the singular musical genius that defined 20th-century entertainment, and the film delivered that experience with an intoxicating level of theatrical showmanship. As the weeks progressed, the financial trajectory of the musical epic demonstrated an exceptional level of theatrical stamina, commonly referred to in industry parlance as having long legs, which completely dispelled any fears that the film would suffer from a massive, front-loaded drop-off after the core fanbase had satisfied its initial curiosity. In its second weekend of release, despite facing fierce competition from a highly anticipated, female-led fashion comedy sequel that captured the top spot on the domestic charts, the biopic held on to its audience with a fierce tenacity, dropping a mere 44% to bring in an additional $54 million. This remarkably shallow decline for a film with such a massive opening weekend proved that word of mouth was operating at an optimal level, transforming the theatrical release into an absolute must-see cultural event for general audiences who may have initially been hesitant to purchase a ticket. Week after week, the film continued to display a phenomenal holding power, reclaiming the #1 spot on the domestic charts in its fourth weekend by grossing over $26 million, a feat that illustrated its unique ability to outlast flash in the pan. Not merely the result of fleeting curiosity but the product of genuine, widespread audience enthusiasm and excellent word-of-mouth recommendations. Internationally, the sequel performed with spectacular efficiency, pulling in $408 million from foreign territories within its first 25 days of release, an international haul that combined with its sturdy $200 million domestic gross to propel the project past the monumental $608 million global milestone. This spectacular achievement placed the fashion sequel in an elite tier of cinematic releases, cementing it as the fourth Hollywood production of the year to cross the $600 million threshold and allowing it to comfortably outgross every single major comic book and superhero release from the previous calendar year within less than a month of theatrical play. The financial performance was particularly lucrative for the studio given that a significant portion of the amplified production budget had been allocated directly to securing the historic, high-profile returns of its central cast members, a calculated financial risk that paid off handsomely as the sheer chemistry and cultural cachet of the performers proved to be the ultimate box office draw. The simultaneous success of these two distinct cinematic properties created a fascinating dynamic within the theatrical ecosystem, as they effectively split the moviegoing public along complementary demographic lines while collectively revitalizing a summer box office that many feared would suffer from franchise fatigue and a lack of original, non-superhero counter-programming. On any given weekend in May, theater marquees displayed a beautiful, diverse contrast between the high-energy, emotionally raw world of a historic musical legend and the sleek, sophisticated, and ruthlessly funny universe of high-fashion corporate warfare. This duality proved that the theatrical marketplace is at its healthiest and most resilient when it offers a wide variety of high-quality, star-driven narratives that cater directly to specific, deeply passionate audiences rather than attempting to please everyone with a single, homogenized blockbusting formula. The financial triumph of both films also underscored a critical lesson for contemporary Hollywood studios regarding the immense value of legacy properties and biographical stories when they are executed with a high degree of artistic respect, lavish production values, and an unyielding commitment to delivering a premium, big-screen experience that simply cannot be replicated on a home streaming device. Furthermore, the tailwinds of the fashion sequel's theatrical run created a massive, quantifiable ripple effect across the entire digital streaming landscape, as a completely new generation of viewers rushed to familiarize themselves with the foundations of the story on various digital platforms. National viewership data revealed an astonishing surge of over 400% in streaming metrics for the original 20-year-old film in the weeks leading up to the sequel's release, illustrating how a successful theatrical campaign can instantly breathe new life into a studio's back catalog and create a powerful, multi-platform ecosystem of content consumption. This phenomenon highlighted the enduring cultural footprint of these beloved characters and proved that when a story truly connects with the collective consciousness of the public, its economic and cultural value can endure for decades, waiting to be unlocked by the right creative catalyst. The box office narrative of the season was thus defined not by a sense of commercial stagnation or predictable franchise dominance, but by a vibrant, highly lucrative resurgence of character-driven cinema that honored the past while confidently commanding the modern theatrical market, leaving both the musical epic and the fashion sequel poised to finish their cinematic runs as two of the most profitable, culturally significant, and intensely discussed motion pictures of the modern era. Please let me know when you are ready for Chapter 2, and I will provide it for you in the exact same continuous, long-form narrative style.